Welcome to Who We Are. I'm your host, Maya Kalaria. Decolonizing the power of narrative, Who We Are centers the voices of the global majority, people who have experienced colonial harm and marginalization. Those who may have lost connection to their cultures, lands, ancestral heritage, food, spiritualities, languages, and much more through colonization, and are now reclaiming their connection to their roots. This is a living archive for stories of struggle, hope, and healing from systems of oppression. It focuses not on what we do, but on who we are, a bridge between the legacy of our ancestors and those who come after us. So let us bear sacred witness to the stories that have silently lived inside our bodies, stories that long to be told and heard. This is who we are. Hi Isabel, thank you so much for joining us today on Who We Are.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's just such a lovely opportunity to have this conversation, which I think for so many of us is so long overdue as well. So I wanted to start by asking you, could you tell me a bit more about the people and the lands that you originate from, where your parents were born, maybe the different regions they were born, and yeah.
Yes, so I'm very excited to share more about my background. So my name is Isabel Bagsik, and my parents come from the Philippines. I was actually born in the Philippines, where my dad was born. And so my father comes from Pasay City, so pretty much in around Manila, the capital of the Philippines. And my mom comes from a province called Bicol. And that could take like 10 to 12 hour drive to get there from Manila. So it is kind of amazing to think about how they came to meet in the city when they were young and working in the same company. So that's where they're from. And I believe like for a few generations of their individual respective families have been in the same area. And I feel like that was pretty common to stay in that same city or neighborhood for quite a few lineages. And so it's kind of amazing to hear stories about their families and just knowing that that's really where they're rooted from.
Wow. I didn't know you were born in the Philippines as well. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. And so, do you recall any cultures and traditions and family stories that have been passed down? And I imagined for you, because you were born in the Philippines, there was that extra connection there to your actual land. So I also wanted to ask you how long you lived there before moving.
Yeah, so I wasn't even a year old before I moved, actually, but I have visited several times over the years. And the last time I went was actually January, February of 2024. So not too long ago. And it's been amazing to deepen my connection and learning about my cultural history and my family history as I grow up and get more curious as I get older. And so some things that I've come to connect with more deeply is a big part of our culture is food. So that's a huge thing, especially my mom's side, where they're always feeding you every couple hours and you're never hungry. You're still full from the previous meal or the previous snack. Like there's this thing in our culture called merienda. So that's the snack in between meals. And so you're you're eating your meal, then the snack, and then you have your next meal, then another snack, and then it's dinner time, and then maybe dessert after that. So it's always eating, and it's this funny, it can be funny and it can be annoying, where it's this well-known thing at family gatherings or Filipino parties where it's like, oh, you're not eating enough, why are you so skinny, here, eat more. And then on the flip side they'll say, what, you need to go on a diet, like so it's this flip side thing this is probably across other cultures too, but food is definitely a big part of our culture. And even thinking about certain dishes like many desserts are sweet sticky rice based or coconut milk based, especially on my mom's side in Bicol. When you visit and go enter the area, just hills and miles upon miles of coconut trees, and it's one of my favorites. Even though the drive there is so long, it's just incredible and so beautiful. And just you just have to get into the province, the countryside, to really experience. And like going into the province, I feel such a deeper connection to the country, to the land, because it's in the country. And when I visited the last two times, because I was older, I feel like when I've passed by or visited the very famous Mayon volcano, um, which is a few hours away from where my mom actually grew up, and there's mythology around it and this whole thing, I feel this deep connection around her, because there's a mythology and story around how there's a goddess related to the volcano. So it's just very, very strong when I go to my mom's province, for sure.
I love this, and actually, that feeds into my next question, which is about the mythology. Um, would you be able to share a bit more about this story about the goddess?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's more that I want to dive deeper into, but from what I do remember is I believe her name is Magayon, which I think translates to beautiful. I'd have to fact check this, so forgive me if I'm wrong. But this is the bits that I do remember, or I feel like I remember. And so she is like usually covered by clouds. And so it's not, so it can be like a hit or miss if we can see her in her full glory. And it's a thing. It's like, oh, I don't know, she's shy. She, like, what when we visit, and like my uncles and my aunts might say that because we can't see the top, and it's like supposed to be this perfect peak. Um, and the last two times I do remember, she did reveal herself. And the clouds really are represented, or in the story, the clouds are her lover and the clouds are protecting her. And I think, I forget what she's being protected from or who. But that's the general gist of that mythology. Just the beauty of her, but she's also being protected by her lover, the clouds.
Wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's such a beautiful myth.
Mm-hmm.
And who told you this myth? Who passed that
There
down?
might have been people in my family who mentioned it, but really I was diving into my own research, um, especially when I got into college and um, got involved with the Filipinx American community and became student leader during my time there, where I really wanted to learn more about my cultural identity, um, especially being separated from my extended family in the Philippines. And it really is just my immediate family here in California. And my mom really does not share much about her upbringing. There's trauma involved, and just like she doesn't
Mm.
share a lot. So it took a lot for me to have the initiative to have the questions and ask her siblings whenever I would go. And so I guess bits and pieces of my own research, and just like being there or getting connected to certain media or um, websites or things from
Right,
Filipino creators. Yeah.
right. Yeah, this is interesting as well because it does lead us to the next few questions because it is about that the disconnect and when that disconnect kind of starts. And I wanted to ask you what brought your parents, your family to, was it America that they came to
Yes.
first? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, my dad worked and lived in Hong Kong for a short period, maybe like 2 years or so. And my mom stayed with him while pregnant with me for a little bit of that time. And I think after I was born, even myself was there for maybe a few months before actually officially moving to California. And it was all because of my dad's work. When I asked him maybe a few years ago, I was surprised when he revealed that he didn't have the goal of going abroad or working in America and having that American dream, he would have been content staying in the Philippines, which is really funny and interesting to learn. But yeah, it was really circumstantial. And he could have had, I could have lived very differently. I could have gone to international school in Hong Kong and raised there. Or he could have been assigned to the East Coast in America, and because some of his friends or some of his coworkers did. But he ended up getting assigned and having the option to choose to go to California in the San Francisco Bay Area, which I still live. So it's kind of wild how just certain decisions that one person makes can really alter the experience of the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And can you share a bit more about how you started to realize the colonial history of the Philippines? Was this something that you self researched and came to your own consciousness around? Or was it something that your family maybe alluded to or spoke about openly?
Yeah. So I feel like there were traces of it as I was growing up. And it didn't really occur to me that those were signs of colonialism. For example, growing up, it was common, or especially now, for English to be taught in school for kids over there. And that it's seen as elite for you to know English and speak English, quote unquote, well. And the other bits that I can count back to is how certain words are American brands that they would relate or refer to. For example, tissues, they would say Kleenex because that's a common popular brand here. Or toothpaste, they might often say Colgate, which is another brand. So there are certain words or things that growing up I would hear my parents and their family reference by American brand names. And I'm like, oh, wait. As I got older, that's because colonialism. And just hearing some, my dad is a big history buff, so he's named certain things over the years of, and not really like in a way of speaking around colonialism explicitly, but thinking back to certain stories or how he's grown up of certain protests or political things happening that he would share just excitedly about history. Thinking back to those stories, I'm like, oh, because of colonialism. Um, so he yeah. Sometimes we butt heads around certain things. He's like, why are you so emotional about this? And I'm like, you grew up around this, but maybe it's around. He's also named like he like why live like why worry about that? He's lived difficult a difficult life growing up, like all these things. So I can understand his desire to not intellectualize his youth. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, so those are some things, and then really diving deeper into understanding how colonialism has affected my culture, my ancestors, was when I went to college, diving deeper into getting involved with on campus Filipinx American orgs, where some of the workshops and um, experiences that we would have or retreats were about our cultural history, about our ancestors, about current events in the Philippines. And that was really helpful and really encouraging and cool to be around my peers who also had the desire to learn and to understand. And that also opened up avenues, or rather, it made me see my parents as not just parents, but as full humans with their own history and lived experiences. And it humanized them more and made me see them in a different light and appreciate how they really uprooted their life to leave their whole village support system to create a new life with just each other and their new child, me. And so
Right.
that time in college really opened up my desire to really look into my cultural history, pre-colonial spirituality, my family history, have deeper curiosity around that, and want to learn more about myself through that. It really opened up different ways to understand myself, understand my parents, and the ways that we navigate this country, things that have happened when I was growing up, and just so much in just understanding our position in history and how that's affected us over in our personal lives and on a global scale, cultural, all these things. So that's where it really opened up for me. And it just continued after college when I discovered local Filipinx communities and nonprofits and organizations where I volunteered, where I discovered more creatives in this cultural group in the city nearby, San Francisco, and wanting to continue exploring that cultural identity further with others who are curious about it through an artistic lens. So it's continued, and maybe not so much in externally nowadays for me, but it's still there in my own personal practice and research.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, that's just so comprehensive as well. Like the different avenues that you've gone down to reconnect with your culture, knowing that there have been these fragmentations. And I wanted to ask you as well, how was it on a day to day basis to be on American land? Well, I say American land, Turtle
Yeah.
Island. How was it to, just get through the day to day life as a woman of color and from a family of color on, a settler colonial land, which, was based on the genocide and the slavery
Mhm.
of others, but then had established itself as this white dominant
Yeah.
society. How was that on a day to day basis? Including racism or just erasure, things like that.
Yeah. So growing up, I actually was in a city in school that was predominantly white and then other Asian cultures. And it was a rarity to see or come across another Filipino. And so even the media that I was consuming growing up as a child, it was primarily like white culture or Filipino news and Filipino culture. There was one channel literally called the Filipino channel, and that's how I also learned the language and the culture and staying connected through current events in that way, because it would just be on, and that was a way for my parents to stay connected and have some semblance of still being part of the country, part of the land,
Yeah.
even separated. And so school and things, looking back, I'm like, I always felt so shy. I had such a disconnect with my voice. I'm sure there's like so much around that, like ancestrally with the women in my lineage, around not being able to be connected to their voices and using it safely or in a way that they think could have been safe. And so I was a very observant child, and I always thought the white girls were cool and popular, but I feel like maybe that was just an inherent thing that was in like cemented in my mind from media, not seeing other cultures being represented in media in the same way that it is nowadays, which is so cool. But it was just this unspoken thing that I just felt and believed in. And it was harder, or it wasn't as easy for me to make friends with the white kids or the white girls, even though they were kind. I just found myself drawn to the other Asian little girls or the other brown girls. And so, yeah, that now that I'm speaking out loud, I'm just processing this right now. I'm like, wait, yeah. And that makes sense. that totally makes sense to reach out to what is familiar. And also because the grocery stores that I would go to with my mom was also like the Chinese markets, because that was nearby and had a lot more similar ingredients that we could find for our dishes. So it was this interesting mix of, the Bay Area is still fairly diverse of where I am, but the city that I was in, I just didn't see Filipinos. Not until I moved to a different city not too far away when I was in middle school, which is where I am now, and it's predominantly there's a lot of Filipinos, and there's a Filipino market. So that has been an interesting reflection too. But yeah, it's thinking about how my mother, who didn't work, she was raising me and my sister. Just thinking about now that I'm older, I wonder how restless or bored she was, not really having a social life on for herself. It was really us, our family, and sometimes we have family friends who just have become like our extended family growing up. So they were like our cousins, aunts, and uncles, but they were really just my dad's coworkers from the Philippines who immigrated to the same region. And so they've just become family to this day. And so that was essentially her social life. And there were a couple people that she met, like maybe when we were playing in the park, or from my classmates where she's made friends. But yeah, that's something that I think about, of what was that like for her to be in her 30s and really just focus on raising a family and not having a car or knowing how to drive for such a long time. And then my dad, who was the breadwinner for his new family and his parents and siblings, to think about the responsibility of that and how he'd have to make sure he'd, you know, do everything right so that, you know, paperwork was checked off and all these things. I still don't understand the visa stuff and all of that. And he still does. And he's been able to help my cousin more recently, who's experiencing the same thing because he lived that. And so, yeah, I feel like that experience then has been really interesting to reflect on, of what was that like for them in their 30s to navigate a whole different country and legal system on their own. Internet was not the way it is now. So much research and so much at stake as well. So yeah, it's been interesting, but I'm glad to see them and us kind of like relax into it more. But, getting older, it's also this weird thing around this knowledge, how this country is stolen land and how it's just a mess. It still is. I mean, I don't need to get into it. It's a mess over here. So with that, it's been beautiful to be able to see different cultural groups come together to name these things and support each other, or have initiatives and movements to, heal together and make changes in different ways on the local level, on the national level, and things like that. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does kind of fold into where we're at now. Um, especially when you think about Turtle Island slash
Mm-hmm.
America. It's it feels like there's a lot of karmic stuff coming up because of the way that that country was born, let's just say, um, and born on stolen land.
Mm-hmm.
And so these issues of, whose land is it? Who has a right to the land? All this stuff around ice and, you
Yeah.
know, people whose ancestors came over as European immigrants are now trying to, claim that land as their own and, get rid of other immigrants, forgetting or deliberately overlooking and ignoring their own history, of brutality. And yeah, it is really, I mean, I know, well, I'm from the core of empire, which is England,
Mhm.
which is where a lot of this was conceived. But it, for us, it's like it manifests in a very different way,
Mhm. Yeah.
because this isn't a settler colonial country, it's a colonial country.
Mhm.
It's a colonizer. um, and so yeah, it's just really interesting to kind of speak to people like yourself, and also to watch what's going on, and to see how what they tried to bury can never be buried.
Yeah.
You know, the land remembers, and we remember in our bones. I think that's the thing as well. You know, even without learning about colonization directly from your family necessarily, in such a kind of outright way, it was still this knowing and this consciousness that came to you about what's happened to your ancestors. And I think that's happened to so many of us as well. Like, I wasn't taught about colonization by my family. In fact, if anything, everyone stayed silent. And at school, we only learnt about how great Britain was and how they'd won First and Second World War. And, you know, all the odds were against us remembering, right? And then look at us now. We're remembering in full. And I think it's because it's in our bodies, and it's in our bones, and it's in our souls. And so it's so nice to have these kind of conversations with people like yourself who, you know, we didn't know each other beyond a year ago. And you've been on this journey, and I've been on this journey, you know, for the last few years, separately. And yet it's what connects us.
Mhm.
And it's just really kind of tragically beautiful,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah. That definitely resonates. One, like two things come up. One, in a silly way, it's like it's very common for Filipino Americans to have eczema because we're not supposed to be here. It's dry here. We're supposed to be in humid island weather. So
Right.
my sister has had eczema for a long time, and I only developed it in the past few years. And I think my dad just developed a patch of eczema. So I'm like, is my body? It's clearly telling me I need to go back to the islands, because it's too dry out here. Yeah, so that's one thing. And then on the flip side of that, I see jokes saying how some, people who aren't meant to be on this land can get sunburned real easily. So that's
Yep.
another joke around that. And when you said tragically beautiful, another thing that comes up, I think about let's say friendships that I've made across cultures, or even my partner. Um, and it's like the violence in our histories of our ancestors. Like like I don't wish for that to happen, but also this is a life that we're making now, and am grateful for who I've come to connect with and love. And so it's truly tragically beautiful, as you say, because it's difficult to reflect on what has had to transpire for, let's say, myself to be experiencing this life right now, and why. I remember a one award show, an actress had said, like, and I appreciate her saying something around like, um, for some reason I was chosen to be able to experience and accept this award, but there's someone just like me, or even more talented and better in a different country, who doesn't have the resources to and access to experience this, even though they are very much more talented. And so it's interesting to think about that as well, of just how how access is a thing, and how just, yeah, this could spiral into different conversations. That's just where my mind, like, I can keep going around like different branches of this topic, but yeah, I'll stop.
Yeah, it's so true. We do have opportunities that people born in our motherlands do not have access to. And that can be a blessing, and it can be a curse, because it we are directly in the capitalist core. especially being on Turtle Island and on English soil, this is a capitalist wet dream, like
Yeah.
where we live. This is where a lot of it was conceived. And, I think we were brought up with the idea that this is the ideal. This is what everyone should want. And I won't speak for you or anyone else, but I know for me, it took me a while to really unpeel that and go, actually, is this what we all should want? Or is it just what we've been told we should want? Because, I know when I think back to the way my ancestors lived in India, I've always kind of there used to be some shame around it because I'd been so indoctrinated into what a modern, developed country should look like, and yeah, I felt this kind of shame around like the poverty and the simpleness of their life. And then not only did I realize as I grew up that it was because of colonialism, because India was literally one of the richest countries in the world. That's why it was colonized by one of the poorest countries in the world at that time, England, and some others. Yeah, and it took me a while to think, actually, who am I to think that, having access to everything at my fingertips and having a certain way of life is better than what my ancestors lived. There are always pros and cons, and yes, we have access to running water and fresh water and all these things, but at the same time, the community aspect has been so fragmented. Yes. I don't know how to speak the language. There's just so much fragmentation, and even just how you mentioned as well, growing up around predominantly white kids and white people. That's the same for me. And so I developed body dysmorphia. And so there are all these things that I know that my ancestors would not have gone through in the same way. And yes, they would have probably worked hard in the fields and toiled away and all these things. So would I want that? Would we all want that? Maybe not. But there are these considerations, that have come to me as I've grown up. Yeah.
Yeah. Ugh, there's so much there too around like first, all of this is made up. Like we can go back and change everything. It's just like who developed the 9 to 5? Who made taxes a thing? You know what I mean? Like why? Why?
Exactly.
So yeah, and my mom really, especially at the height of the pandemic, got into watching YouTube vlogs, especially of different cultures and their different ways of living. And sometimes I think like, even though they might be toiling in the fields and, doing things without certain technologies and conveniences that we may have, they also don't have a lot of the stresses that we are experiencing too. I mean, of course there's pros and cons in certain ways. Like they have to really work hard to survive, to make their to eat, to hunt and whatnot. But also they don't have to deal with taxes and these like if we were to think about what we really need to live a good life, like that's what I'm trying to think of, especially as I get older, like what really consists of a life well lived. And it's not these fancy material things, though those are fun, and I think like indulge for sure, why not, if you can. But it's like being with the people you love who make you feel good, and like eating nourishing food and just having your feet on the land, especially the beach. Like I need that. The ocean. Like what are the things that make a life well lived? And a lot of it does stem from our pre-colonial, you know, histories and ways of being and community living and being able to support each other, and not this hyper independence that is so, common in America, capitalist societies of, you have to work hard and you can't, like living in a multi-generational home is common. Like I live with my family, and I'm grateful for it. And it's a thing that, we can divide labor and support each other so that you're not the only one having to cook and do all these things. Like, they can be separated, and I really appreciate that. And so yeah, it's a lot. It's it's a lot to
Yeah.
reflect on and consider. And one other thing that comes up too is when I was learning more about my culture, Philippines was a matriarchal society, and a lot of
Was it?
cultures were. A lot of like indigenous cultures are matriarchal societies, and then colonizers with patriarchy come in to flip that because it's because of the power hungry greed and all of that. Whereas matriarchy, it's very community led, and it's very like caring and emotional, and all these things that we've forgotten. But I feel like there are waves of getting back to that, and getting back to caring for the land and respecting the land as well.
Yeah. Wow. I did not know that it was a matriarchal society before the Spanish colonizers came along. And but you know what? It doesn't surprise me because so many, like you said, so many of these societies were. And I think the nature of colonization is a very patriarchal
Mm.
energy. You know, it's kind of domination, control, violence, especially toxic. You know, the toxic patriarchal, not the healthy masculine,
Right.
obviously. But yeah, a lot of these societies were matriarchal, and we forget that, or it gets lost in the ethers, and especially because our families don't always remember, right? The ones who are still alive, because this was like way back, like centuries back. So it's really kind of, it must have been really lovely, but maybe also I don't know, like lovely, and I wonder if there was some kind of like grief sounds like a strong word, but kind of, you know, this feeling of
Yeah.
loss around what could have been.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And definitely this, since I was young, I've been learning about indigenous people on Turtle Island in certain novels or things that we would read in elementary school. I already had this like imagination, or this like curiosity around what would have this country, or what would have been like if, they were still living the way that they should be here. And so there was always that seed in thinking when I was young. And what else is coming up is a big part of colonialism is our religion. Catholicism makes is I think like over 90% of the Philippines practices Catholicism, something like huge like that. And that came from Spain. And Christianity is, as it is, since then, and like still is deeply rooted in toxic masculinity and toxic patriarchy and the harm and violence around it. And when I was curious about what was the original teachings and like the values before it got stained, and like looking into other writers who were people of color and discovering or like writing about it, I'm like, wait, like thinking about the pieces that would be shared, like Jesus helped people who were oppressed and he was an activist.
Literally.
And like, why is it getting muddled in all of this other harmful rhetoric that doesn't make sense and doesn't align? And where are the women? Where are the women writers? Like, I want to hear, where was Mary Magdalene's text? You know what I mean? So, like,
Well, it was
right.
buried. It was buried, wasn't it? And it was discovered in I think in the 1940s.
Yeah, I need to
So,
look into that,
yeah,
So it's like things like that. It's
yeah,
like, I don't believe, like, why is it only men who could be priests? Like, that would be something that I was curious about when I was young, too. So it's like, getting curious and diving deeper into this, like, definitely could, I'm sure my parents would think this is sacrilegious. But I mean, come on, like, if you were to look into history and like really look back into why is it like, that's a big part that's still affecting harm today, this narrative that fuses government and religion in a really violent way. because of the powers and the oppression that they impose on large amounts of people, um, because of like almost brainwashing or this like sense of control or like power around their morality and um values that are skewed. So yeah, that's again another tangent, but that was also another thing that
But
came up.
that's a huge, huge part of
Yes.
colonization, the religious colonization of the people and the spiritual brainwashing, because it puts fear into people. And, there's nothing more abusive than the idea of heaven and hell. Because if you can indoctrinate people into, if you do this, you'll go to heaven, if you do this, you'll go to hell, that seeps into people so deeply. It's one of our core kind of wounds as I think as human beings, that kind of morality wound, and also, the fear of death, and wanting to secure a place for yourself after death. And it's such a very cruelly clever way
Mm-hmm.
that Christianity was spread. I mean, firstly, it was also spread just by sheer
Yeah.
violence, sheer brutality, like literally threatening people's
Mm-hmm.
lives. But then, if it wasn't quite that physically brutal, it was using these very insidious tools of like indoctrination via fear. And so I think it's really interesting what you're saying about the Philippines, because that still is such a hugely, it's still very steeped in that spiritual
Yes.
colonization that came with the Spanish, and then, continued even when the Americans were there. And I wanted to ask, this concept of white Jesus, is the imagery of is the imagery of Jesus still very white in the churches there?
Oh, yes. I mean, like
Okay.
I mean, it's interesting because there are certain like I don't know what you would call it, but like certain figures related to Jesus that are um represented brown or black. And so I don't know like the stories around. So that's unclear to me, but for the most part, yes, white Jesus is a thing for sure,
Right.
especially with how so much of the Philippines has put European American culture as elite, as a thing to strive for, as a thing that is better than their own people, for example, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate. But yeah, that kind of iconography is still common.
Yeah. And it feeds directly into the white man as God,
Mhm.
which very much benefits, the Western world
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
very much.
And like as you're saying that, it also makes me think about how excuse me. There's there's clearly some stuff that wants to be shared. But it makes me think about how there's a big time in history, and I feel like it's still prevalent now, but especially like mail order brides and like the fetishization around Asian women seen as submissive. And it's like you see a white man marrying an Asian woman, and it's like a very common thing. And even today, it's like how, I respect the women who are trying to get their bag and trying to like get out and live a better life as long as they're taken care of. But it is a thing where I like side eye the man's intentions when I'm in the Philippines, and I'm like, okay, what is their story? Like I don't want to judge, but also I judge just knowing the history of colonialism. So it's like, do
Yeah.
you really love her? Or is this a weird fetishization, ownership? Like what is this? You know what I mean? So that's another branch of conversation that comes to mind and makes me laugh about like thing about the reality show 90 Day Fiance, and there was like a Filipina, and she was like so popular and funny, um and how sassy and like she was around her white fiance or something, and he was made the joke of, and I believe they're not together, but I think she's living a better life without it's just it's just like I'm branching off here again, but yeah, that's another thing that's coming up too.
She did what she needed to do. And, I think there's a parallel. Well, there's definitely a parallel here with other colonized countries, and I'm sure the listeners will agree because when I was in Ghana last year, I was there for about 6 months, and this happened there. You know, there were older white men that were just suspiciously there,
Mm.
just on their own, and then either they were surrounded by. They usually had a sidekick, and this person it was very dubious as to what role this person played, but they were usually a young, attractive person
Okay.
from Ghana. You know, whether they identified as male or
Mm.
female, I didn't actually see anyone outside of that the gender
Mhm.
binary in that way. But these men were coming over to have dubious sexual
Mm.
situations with people. And I think because they could, because when there is a population who have been colonized, who have lost their wealth because it's been stolen
Mhm.
and siphoned, they are left in sometimes in quite desperate situations. And then obviously the white West and the capitalist West is peddled as this dream situation. So, you know, it creates this um, it creates a ripe kind of ground for these men to go over and to take their pick
Yeah.
of people who want a better life and kind of, um, manipulate people in that way. And if it wasn't for their money and the fact that they're white, this wouldn't happen. So it was really disturbing to see, and I see the parallels, and I'm absolutely certain it happens in India and
Mhm.
all like different parts of Southeast Asia, and we hear about Thailand, and it's just this really, it is tragic. It is. And it's been set up that way because no one in the right mind would do that if we were connected to who we are and our roots and our value as people and our communities as well. I think sometimes it's about that disconnect from our communities. Maybe we don't have enough people around us saying, "What the hell are you doing?"
Yeah.
Or maybe they're brainwashed as well and they're like, "Yeah, go get it, like money, go live a better, quote unquote, better life, whatever that is."
Yeah. Yeah. Oof. I mean, like, there's definitely a distinction between sex workers who are doing that out of like their own agency and empowerment, and then those who are, you know, feeling like they have no other choice and are put
Yeah.
into positions where that's one of the only money making opportunities that they have. So I feel like,
Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely that distinction for sure. And it is unfortunate when it's the latter, when they are taken advantage of, and those who are taking advantage of them know that, like, that's the violence and that's the harm for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, and that's a brilliant point as well because it's about agency and it's about the conscious involvement in that. And yeah, there's different ways that that's set up. Um, and so, yeah, it's just a really complex and interesting situation. But gosh, we've really covered so much.
We really did.
We really did. Thank you so much, Isabel, for this incredibly, incredibly fruitful and rich conversation. And we've traveled not only to the Philippines, but we've kind of traveled to different complexities, different realms of how colonization can actually affect communities, affect us, and how we're actually healing from that as well. So I wanted to ask as we end, like, is there anything else you wanted to say? Anything else you wanted to bring into the conversation?
Yeah, I mean, just in a funny way, I am not surprised how, how varied we were, because I'm a Gemini sun and Mercury and it's Gemini season. So I'm just like out here just yapping away. But I am grateful for this opportunity to reconnect with you and dive deeper into this conversation that I'm really passionate about. And especially, I've come across and know that there are folks who feel very disconnected from their culture. And so I think, like, even if you may not have people or family still in your ancestral country, there's so much research and information out there. And I hope you don't feel like you're quote unquote like not enough in terms of like not Filipino enough or not like whatever culture you are. And I've heard that because of this disconnect and this because of the violence that we've experienced in our history. And so just know that no matter what folks say or whether families or parents say, like scold you of like not knowing the language, you know, it's really, it's not your fault. And you can now, there's so much information out there now to do that research and learn more. And there are people out there, if not locally, online, to connect with and to confide in and to find community in. So that's just what's coming up for me in terms of being able to, at any age, any time, to deepen your connection to your cultural history and to your own cultural identity, because it is really amazing how much there is to opening up who you are when you have this remembering of this connection to certain land, region, people.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Isabel, so much for joining us. And, you know, hopefully those who are listening can take something away from this conversation and to know that you're not alone. You are absolutely not alone, and you are enough. No matter how disconnected you may feel right now, we've all been there at some point. So, you know, hopefully this conversation and others like it will really help.